I'd like to welcome everybody to this auspicious Gimmel Tammuz Melava Malka right here in Melbourne, Australia. Many months ago, when Young Yeshiva initiated the process of organizing this event, one of the primary objectives was to bring together the entire community in a strong and a cohesive and a momentous display of Achdus. Baruch Hashem, looking around with around 700 people in attendance tonight, we have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. However, aside from the large crowd gathered here tonight, there is something else that you may have or perhaps may not have noticed, and I'm referring to one specific person who is here tonight. One special individual, one person, times 700. You see, I'm sure that if the Rebbe was here tonight, and in fact, I'm sure that the Rebbe is here tonight, the Rebbe would not just be looking at a crowd of nameless faces, because we know that to the Rebbe, every single person, every single individual was unique, was precious, and is precious, and an entire world. As his Chassidim, the Rebbe empowers us to do the same, to realize the power of every single individual. The person who is sitting on the right of us, the person who is sitting on the left of us, the person sitting across us, and perhaps most importantly of all, the person who is within us. It's Hashgacha Pratis. This week is Parshas Korach. And there are so many messages that the Rebbe gives us about Parshas Korach, about the power of a single Jew. And what better example do you need from Korach himself? When you learn the story of Korach in a simple way, you get the impression that Korach was literally a quiet, wicked man. But time and again we have the Rebbe's Torah say, dig deeper, look deeper, and you will find someone who is actually very profound. And just to give three very short examples. At the beginning of this week's Parsha, we have the first Rashi. And the Rashi begins that Parsha zu Yofen Nidreshes. This Parsha is expounded very nicely. In one Sikha, the Rebbe asks, what is Rashi saying? And in a nutshell, the Rebbe says, if you want more than pshat, you want to be in Doirish, you want to look deep into Korach, look in the Midrashim, because there you will see how beautiful he was, what was really going on inside of him. In similar fashion, just a couple of Rashis later, Rashi notes that the pasuk lists the yichus of Korach, and it goes all the way up to Levi. And Rashi says, but elsewhere we know the pasuk emphasizes that he is Ben Yaakov. And the Rebbe says again the same message, dig deeper. He's Ben Yaakov, he's connected with every single one of us. And moving on a couple of Rashis later, the Rebbe quotes the Rashi that says that V'koirach pikachaya, he was a smart man. Why did he do this shtus? Why did he do this foolishness? The Rebbe asks, hang on, how do we know that he was a smart man? Everything we know about Korach is in this week's Parsha. Where does it say that Korach was a smart man? The Rebbe says, because if you look in his shtus, go deeper, and think about what he really wanted to achieve, you will see the pikchus, you will see his smartness. It didn't express itself in the proper way, but it was there beneath the surface all along. Tonight, in order to launch the spirit of this evening's theme, we're proud to present you an audio-visual collage that gives us a little glimpse of the Rebbe tapping into and unleashing the raw power and a hidden potential within each individual. I would like to thank Josh Goldhirsch for his efforts in being the catalyst for this video project with Jewish Educational Media, and the splendid result is all to his credit. If everyone could please turn their attention to the screens. In that video, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs captured it so eloquently when he said, "You saw your reflection in the Rebbe's eyes, and you were suddenly much bigger than you thought you were." These words resonate with many of us present here tonight who had changed people because of the Rebbe's guiding light. There is nothing like a local connection. It is my great honor tonight to introduce you to a man who needs no introduction here in Melbourne. You all know Rabbi Label Wolf as an international presenter in the fields of psychology, wellness and mindfulness, interfaced with the Jewish spirituality of Kabbalah and Chassidus. Rabbi Wolf has served at the helm of several Hillel chapters, both in the United States of America as well as right here in Australia. And he has also founded and directed two Chabad houses right here in Melbourne. More recently, he is the founder and dean of the Spirit Grow Holistic Center. Tonight, Rabbi Wolf has graciously agreed to share with us some of his personal interactions with the Rebbe. He will afford us an intimate glimpse into the Rebbe's devotion to just a single person and how his guiding hand so expertly mined those precious gems that were lurking just beneath the surface all along. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rabbi Wolf.
Mein teurer Rebbe, you are here with us tonight, and I would like to publicly acknowledge what you did, not just for me, not just for my wife, for my family, but all the individuals that I've had the great privilege to interface with throughout the years of my work. Batzarli Ekra Ushma Mahoichaloi Koili, which appears in today's Tehillim. I had moments of doubt, confusion, indecision, and I called out to you. And you heard me from your Heichal Menachem, 770 Eastern Parkway, wherever I was. You took a young man who had just finished his law degree and invited him to take a year off to work with what you called academic youth. I didn't know what that term meant, so we consulted the Maskirus, who inquired with the Rebbe, and the answer was to work on campus with students. There was no such opportunity in Australia, so asking the Rebbe where I should look, the Rebbe said, the United States. And with the Rebbe's bracha, I was led to the University of Wisconsin with a bride of some 18 months, a child, a baby. We went to the wilds of Madison, where there were 7,000 Jewish students out of a total population of 50,000. We were the only Orthodox people on campus. I worked there for some years. My wife and I had an open home, and Baruch Hashem, many students came through, and then later in New York. However, I had self-doubt. The kind of KPIs, as the modern term is, that I set for myself were high, but I gauged myself via these expectations, and I gave myself a very low scorecard, to the extent that I felt that I was not doing justice to the shlichus that the Rebbe had adopted me. I wrote to the Rebbe and asked perhaps I should be leaving this area of life. And as this slide indicates, this was the Rebbe's response. Note written on Zois Chanukah, where you would expect the Rebbe to be extremely busy, he takes the time to answer a young man in the field. The said options, however, can be considered all only when one is at the beginning of the road and is to make a choice. In your case, however, since you have already been active in youth work for a number of years and have seen that you have had hatzlacha in your work, and hatzlacha in an area where it is very doubtful that anyone else could have had such hatzlacha, namely the area of academic youth, and moreover, in an area where the time element is very important, since the sooner a Jewish boy or girl begins to observe the mitzvahs, the more certain it is that they'll be saved. Your option has already been decided by Hashgacha Pratis. Consequently, I can see no justification for you to abandon this sacred work, God forbid. As Rabbi Sachs had mentioned in that video we just saw, the Rebbe believed in his shaliach more than the shaliach believed in himself. And in so doing, not only empowered, but also enthused to continue. However, I still felt inadequate, especially in the area of Jewish learning. I had learned for some time at Yeshiva Gedola, but not as long as most have. Even when I had married, and the Rebbe advised me to continue as perhaps the first koilelnik in Australia. There was no koilel, so the Rebbe told me to ask the Menayel, Reb Zalman Serebriansky, Olav Shalom, if I could study there part-time, which I did. And then, as a consequence, I still felt an inadequacy throughout life. So I asked the Rebbe at one point, how can I make up for lost time in Jewish learning? The Rebbe responded as follows, in the next slide. To summarize, it is plain and clear that you should continue your Hinuch activity without detracting from it, though you may explore the possibility about using your available time for learning Torah. If this spare time is not sufficient, there is another option, and that is to take a part-time substitute for some of your activities, such as you can safely transfer to such a substitute under your supervision and responsibility. From here, I learned a very important principle, the difference between delegation and substitution, including supervision. We have a tendency today to think highly of the process of delegation, to give ourselves time. The Rebbe said, be cautious about delegating, because delegating means you cease to take full responsibility. The Rebbe was saying, substitution with supervision is much more desirable. And still, I wasn't satisfied. And now I feel embarrassed that I took so much of the Rebbe's time continuing with this thought flow of personal inadequacy. The Rebbe responded, and this was the final response in this particular arena, if you may still feel apprehensive as to how much you can accomplish in your Torah studies under such limited conditions, I would like to remind you that the beginning of the Alter Rebbe's Sefer Torah which follows the Sedras of the Torah, brackets, the Likutei Torah, though named differently, is the second part of Torah as is well known, end of brackets, that this first drush on the first page contains the quotation, Tzedakah teroimem goy. Shal yidei nesinas tzedakah. Nasis moichei v'libos zachim elef pa'amim kacha. An amazing quote, that if you give tzedakah, your mind operates differently, with greater clarity. But the Rebbe emphasized a different subtle point and said, and although in the plain sense of it, it deals with ordinary tzedakah, it is clear that the pasuk, hence the drush, encompasses also spiritual tzedakah, such as chinuch activity in which you are privileged to engage. In other words, the great schus of your continuing in this area will bring you extraordinary hatzlacha in your own Torah studies and in your own spare time, 1,000-fold. And according to the Tzemach Tzedek, in his commentaries on this drush, this still is the Rebbe's words, the said phrase is not just the manner of speaking, but actually meant what it says without exaggeration. Those of us who are in shlichus, those of us who are in chinuch generally, experience this. When we prepare a class, a shiur, with the intention of giving it over, the way that the mind works compartmentalizes the information, organizes it, gathers it, memorizes it, is a quantum leap removed from when we're reading for our own personal satisfaction and knowledge. According to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the quote, 1,000 times as much. I happen to have a letter dated Gimmel Tammuz. In this particular letter, 47 years ago, the Rebbe, by example, indicated to me the importance of making everybody feel worthy, with self-esteem, a sense of importance in the world at large. He writes to me, I duly received your letter of Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and the regards I received through Rabbi I.D. Groner, who told me that I would receive further details from you. This explains the delay of my reply. The Rebbe has to explain to a chassid that there was a delay and he seemingly apologizes. Why does the Rebbe have to go out of his way to give that explanation? Whatever the subsequent information in the letter was would be quite sufficient. But here is a teaching that I learnt. Make the person feel good. There was a delay. Perhaps the person might think the Rebbe doesn't care as much about me. God forbid there may be favoritism. Not at all. The Rebbe wants everyone to know that every single individual is not just worthy, but special in his eyes, and he will treat each person with royalty. Another letter which emphasizes the need of joy and simcha in shlichus, in all of one's holy work. This was a time when my wife and I were deciding whether to return to Australia. The Rebbe answers, in answer to your basic question as to whether to return to Australia or continue your work in the United States, I must point out the obvious, namely that the fullest success in one's efforts can be attained only if the work is done with joy and enthusiasm, and certainly that it should not affect one's peace of mind. These were also the conditions for continuing your work in the United States, where you have met with Hatzlacha and where there is certainly a wider field than Australia. We stayed on in America longer, but the point here is peace of mind, joy, enthusiasm. These are essential components for Hatzlacha. Although in a letter I'm going to read shortly, the inyan of Kabbalah's oil is also terribly significant, if not more basic, the truth is Yogaito umatsoso. If one toils, one will find that joy and enthusiasm. And once again, at some stage, I found myself in the hashgacha of my work had ended in a particular phase. The Hillel Foundations were closing shop for full-time work in Australia, and I was looking for a job. I was no longer questioning to the same extent my knowledge base, but was this some sort of message about our future? And the Rebbe was consistent, and he answers me and says, "You will gather from the above that my considered view is that you and your wife, to the extent of the time permitting her, should concentrate your capacities, knowledge, and experience in the area of chinuch in the maximum degree. There is no basis, in fact, to think that you'll become a businessman or engage in any other profession and will be able to accomplish more in chinuch than hitherto. It is also unnecessary to point out to you that should those who follow such a misguided urge found the consequences entirely different than what they had anticipated or hoped for." In other words, hashgacha is deciding one's course of action in the beginning of life, in the beginning of professional life. It is true that we live in a world where people change work very, very often. Perhaps the Rebbe is hinting to us that this is not desirable, that there's great importance in continuity, but most certainly in the area of chinuch. Another very interesting hoirah. I always sent to the Rebbe reports. I sent to the Rebbe all the flyers that we ever produced, kept the Rebbe appraised fully. There were occasions when the Rebbe was upset with me, and here was such an occasion. I had sent the Rebbe a particular diagram which I had found from stock photos, which was an outline of a person, but just a pencil drawing of an outline. I was using this particular diagram, this particular figure, to explain the 10 spheros as they express in seichel and midos, corresponding to different parts of the body being the analog of the created universe. The particular figure happened to have long hair and a long beard. I had intended to make a particular point about the holiness of the hair of the face, hence the long beard. The Rebbe responds, and he says, Muva b'kama sforim. This particular diagram has appeared in a number of texts, B'kesher le'eser spheros, in context of the 10 spheros, v'loi kadai, and it's not appropriate. That it actually conveys a negative impression. What is that negative impression? The Rebbe goes on and emphasizes it in a second point. V'havchoy, quite the opposite. Tziyur ha'adam, the particular outline, the form of picture that you've chosen for the human being is one that unfortunately creates a negative rosham, an expression which will somehow leave a negative impression. When people look at this and see this as associated with Kabbalah. In other words, the detailing, the importance of making sure that every innuendo, every aspect of anything you put on paper and serve as a teaching tool must be absolutely pure, because visuals are even more impactful than our words. Two more little hoiros which I received. The next one deals on the difference on how you think and speak and how you think and write. The Rebbe writes, no doubt you also know of the explanation by the Alter Rebbe about the importance of Limud HaTorah in general and on Shabbos in particular, bracket, sees important of Limud Torah is that it leads to action, namely fulfillment of the mitzvahs. That was the text, which presumably Dr. Nissan Mindel, who took care of his English correspondence, noted from the Rebbe's notes. The Rebbe looks at this letter because he looked at every letter that was written for corrections and personally corrected them, and he completely changes the emphasis. He says, the way we should read it is, no doubt you also know of the explanation by the Alter Rebbe about the importance of Limud Torah in general, and the important thing of Limud Torah is that it leads to action, namely fulfillment of mitzvahs, and on Shabbos in particular. Whereas you might have read this letter of the Rebbe saying, don't forget to learn on Shabbos, because that was the emphasis. The Rebbe said, no, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that whatever learning you do must have an action plan of implementation associated with it. And yes, also the learning from Shabbos. The importance of clarity, the importance of being exact, not to allow the receiver of writing to get the incorrect impression, one that if you were speaking orally and verbally, you could correct immediately. And finally, the importance of learning for learning's sake. And here is a very interesting piece of imagery. To clarify the point, by way of a practical example, consider the problem connected with Limud Torah. Jews have been described in the Torah as an Am Chacham B'Novan, real intellectuals, and the Torah should, of course, be studied with enthusiasm and joy, like all mitzvahs. Yet, it is stated in Chassidus that Torah should be studied as one who is chopping wood, ! Meaning, not because of intellectual gratification, nor even because one feels intellectually impelled to study Torah, or because one is born by nature a student, but because God commanded us to study Torah. To be sure, the Torah should be studied even shaloi lishma, but then it's not the ideal and perfect study as when it is studied in a manner of chopping wood, not even as an ardent wood chopper who enjoys chopping wood per se. And since a Jew is required to learn Torah in this way, it is obvious that he's been given the ability to divest himself of all personal motivation so as to learn Torah with perfect Kabbalah's oil, yet with real inner joy and enthusiasm, because the principle of Yagaita Matzasa applies here too. There is surely no need to elaborate on it to you any further. Joy and enthusiasm from learning is not the motivation for learning, it's the consequence of learning. If you practice Yagaita or Matzasa, you will have through the Yagaita the Matzasa of joy and enthusiasm. But that is not the initial motivation. The initial motivation is the kind of bittul of relationship with the Eibishter, one of Kabbalah's oil. And that has continued throughout, subsequent to this letter, to guide me. I don't enjoy everything I do, but I work hard at it. And on occasion, the opening takes place for us to be able to see the results in that regard. I thank you, Rebbe, for having guided your shaliach, your chassid. I know full well that you spent more time with those who needed you more because of their weakness, and I was such an example. But I'm forever indebted, and in so doing, I urge everyone to continue to ask the questions, to be able to get the answers, whether igros, whether oil, or simply keeping the Rebbe in mind. I also want to mention to you, Rebbe, that my grandson Beryl, Dov Arya Ben Rochel made the first cut of this PowerPoint presentation, and I want to thank my wife, Leah Baschana, for being the inspiration to share some of this correspondence with people who would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Wolf. We're going to be taking a short intermission for dinner, and the keynote speaker will begin at around 10 minutes, 9:15-ish. So if anybody needs to move around or whatever the case might be, please make sure to be ready to move on with the next part of the program in around 10 minutes. Thank you. Baruch Hashem, tonight, I've been on the receiving end of a lot of compliments for this event, which was put together so fabulously. But every event requires partners to make it happen. And I'd like to thank Mr. Leon Soloveitchik for partnering with Young Yeshiva in making this event possible, as well as for sponsoring the beautiful video that we saw earlier tonight. And his sponsorship has allowed it to be seen not just here, but all around the world. The keynote speaker tonight is, of course, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Rabbi Jacobson is the author of the best-selling book, Toward a Meaningful Life, that I'm sure many of us here in this room have read. And it's a publication that has sold over 300,000 copies to date. It's been translated into a lot of languages, and I bought a paper up front because I couldn't memorize it all. In Hebrew, English, French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, German, Hungarian, Polish, Czech, and Georgian. If you feel anything's missing from the list, I'm sure we can go and organize. Anyways, Rabbi Jacobson, he also heads the Meaningful Life Center, which presents to people of all backgrounds the universal teachings of Torah and Chassidus as a blueprint for life. For over 14 years, Rabbi Jacobson also served as a chayzer and an editor-in-chief of the Vad HaNachas HaTmimim, which was responsible for publishing the talks of the Rebbe. In addition to that, Rabbi Jacobson he headed the research team for Sefer Halikutim, an encyclopedic work of Hasidic thought. And as a chayzer, Rabbi Jacobson has had the privilege, as he shared with us a little bit today, the opportunity to ask and to analyze and to discuss bichsav through writing a lot of the things that the Rebbe spoke about in public to his Chassidim. So it's my great honor tonight to welcome Rabbi Jacobson to Melbourne and welcome him to the stage. If everybody could please pay your undivided attention. Thank you.
Good Vach, Shavua Tov. Yes, thank you very much for the warm hospitality that Melbourne has provided me, as well as Sydney a day before on Thursday night. You want me to mention all the cities and get an applause for all of them? We're not going to do a roll call. We're not going to go by countries, and we're not going to go by cities, even though the Rebbe is a global leader. So we'll just suffice to say it covers the entire span of this planet and beyond. The truth is that though I do some public speaking here and there, I do give classes and write, my real personality and my real identity was shaped by being a listener and not a speaker. As was mentioned, my great claim to fame, my greatest tribute, I believe, is being a chazer, which means a repeater. Someone that memorized, retained, and absorbed, and then was part of the select group of people who documented and published the Rebbe's words. So for many, many years, I didn't do much speaking. I did a lot of listening. And that really is what defines my life. So anything I say here this evening is really a result of listening, not of innovating and speaking. So I want to begin with a story of a young man, grew up in Crown Heights, USA. You know, we all probably remember our teenage years, our turbulent years, a time of transition, when you're growing through the awkwardness of adolescence and trying to define yourself, who are you? Separating yourself, cutting the umbilical cord, figuratively speaking, alech lecha ma'artzecha meladetecha mebeis avicha type of journey. And it doesn't happen overnight. And this young man was no different. And he was going through his own struggles. On one hand, growing up in a very traditional Hasidic Chabad home, going through the whole school system. The Rebbe being, of course, the prominent king on the hill based in Crown Heights. And being a curious and even skeptical young adult, this student, who wasn't actually a great student at all, was quite rebellious, struggled with many questions about Yiddishkeit and about Torah and about Chassidus and about a Rebbe. Like, what does that all mean? Definitely saw a certain type of, lack of a better word, a certain herd mentality, many people following a certain cultural environment with all the pressures that come with it. But for this young man, actually, that was not very appealing, because he was looking for something like unique and individual, and not just follow the crowd. He was a very voracious reader and read from all different types of books and ideas. And most of his struggles were internal. They weren't expressed externally. Essentially, a rebel. Maybe a rebel without a cause. And as he was going through his struggles, it happened to be the Rebbe was speaking precisely about this topic. So it caught this young man's attention. And the Rebbe was speaking about the rebellion in young people. And specifically, that was the period in time, the rebellion of the 60s in the United States, maybe all over the world, but definitely in America. A rebellion that really created tremendous upheaval and changed society as we know it. And the Rebbe said, to paraphrase briefly, that many people think the rebellion in young people who challenge the status quo and they challenge the rules and authority and establishment is coming from a bad place. You know, because they're not conforming, they're not listening. Chutzpah. As the Gemara says, the end of Masechta Seita, one of the signs, the end of days before Mashiach comes, Ikvasa de Mashiach, will be the chutzpah yazga, the audacity of young people speaking back and not respecting their elders. Na'orim pnei skenim yalbinu. And the Rebbe said that's a grave error to suggest it's coming from a bad place. It's actually coming, as the Rebbe said, from the fire and the passion of a burning soul who wants to some way change the world, but is frustrated and doesn't know how. So adults would do well if they can't help to get out of the way, and if they want to help, to use their maturity and their experience and their seasoning to help harness this energy, this fire, and direct and channel it toward a spiritual revolution toward actually changing the status quo and changing the world. This was, in brief, the Rebbe's message. And this young man was mesmerized, captivated by this thought, because it's exactly what he was going through. And he heard many rabbis and teachers and parents and adults preaching to him and to others. But here is a man, if you want to put it in secular terminology, a 75-year-old older Hasidic Rebbe, ultra-Orthodox, coming from another world, speaking in a more hip and fashionable and relevant way than he heard from anyone around him, his peers and people of his own age. And though it wasn't a change that happened overnight, but ultimately this young man came to discover that what you had in the Rebbe was not just another traditional rabbi. This was a revolutionary, a pioneer, a trailblazer who wants to really transform this world. And that's extremely appealing to a young person who has such energy inside their soul. And with a short period of time, this young man made a commitment in his heart and soul to want to become part of this revolution. Yes, it was dressed up in traditional garb, but at the heart of it was change, was nonconformity, everything about creating a new world. And it really changed this person's life, this young man's life, because from there on, he became a rebel with a cause. Now, how do I know the intimate details of this young man? I'll tell you. Because he's standing right before you tonight. That is me. Now, without going into all the details and full confession of all my transgressions, I will say that once it resonated with me, I would say even musically, the poetry and the power of the Rebbe's vision, which of course is the Torah vision and the vision of Chassidus, that's here thousands of years, but the Rebbe channeled it in language that we can all relate to. I never look back. So though it's many years, I'm exactly that same 17, 18-year-old with a few more years of experience. And that soul that's burning inside of me, which was ignited by the Rebbe, continues to burn even more intensely. So in that sense, 25 years of Gimmel Tammuz, as sad as it is on one hand, I see it, and I believe we should all see it, in the spirit of how the Rebbe would want us to see it, which is a catalyst to even more embrace the revolution that the Rebbe launched back in 1950. Based on the revolution that the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbeim before him launched, the Alter Rebbe, Al Shem Tov, go all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu and Avram Avinu. So I made the commitment at the time that I want to access and I want to connect. And the best way was to get involved in the work of writing and documenting and remembering the Sichos. And I was very intrigued by the process, and that's what I did. I hung around and ultimately had the schus to become the main writer of the Rebbe's Sabrengens. And my real ulterior motive was, besides being part of documenting history, was really to have access, to be able to ask questions, which the Rebbe, of course, loved and encouraged, to even challenge, not challenge in a disrespectful way, but to probe and to discover more and bring out from the Rebbe his genius and his brilliance, his ge'enis in every area of life and every area of Torah. That's what I did. A lot of it is behind the scenes, but I exploited the opportunity to the fullest. Actually, I have some regrets. I should have asked some more questions. And there was a price. You got, from time to time, a good chelik, meaning getting over your head for crawling too intimate into certain subtle questions and sensitive matters, but still worth it. So with that experience, and with those years, I've tried to distill especially after 1992, when the Rebbe had tragically that Monday night the stroke. And then 2 years and some months later is Gimmel Tammuz. So of course, it all shook us all up, including myself. But in addition to that, on a personal note, I also lost a job, because my whole life orbited around writing the Farbrengens. Farbrengen on Shabbos, which was like clockwork, always a Farbrengen. The whole week was scheduled for me to work on preparing and publishing and annotating the Sichos. So suddenly on that Monday night, Chav Zayin Oder, the Rebbe had the stroke, it all stopped. I'm not suggesting this is the tragedy, my own personal loss of a job, but for me it affected me in that way, and I had to revisit and repurpose my mission, so to speak. And it became very clear very quickly, because I remember the Sikha the Rebbe spoke 6 weeks before the stroke, and he said exactly that. He said, when a Rebbe has a stroke, those that heard what he said, that listened to what he said, should be his mouthpiece. And that's when I made the determination to write Toward a Meaningful Life, and to dedicate my life, the next stage of my life, to do exactly the same thing. To take the Rebbe's words, but this time, not just in its original Yiddish and all the Hebrew sources and all the scholarship, but to present it in palatable terms to people of all walks of life. So my mission just continued in a different shape and form. And as a result, I had the great privilege to meet so many different types of people from different backgrounds. And I saw with my own eyes, witnessed a living demonstration of the Rebbe's impact, not on one small group or several groups, literally men and women and children from all ends of the spectrum, from the most observant and religious to the most, what would be called, the Rebbe wouldn't like this term, but secular, Taneka Shenishbu, people that did not have the opportunity to have a Jewish education. I can share with you some very fascinating interactions, because when these worlds clash, a world that I come from, a world like that of skepticism and even cynicism, interesting sparks fly. But I do want to share, and I'll weave in some anecdotes, a few key points, because at the end of the day, the Rebbe would always tell us that any gathering and any conversation and any talk should be measured by one criteria. What are the results? When people walk away, was it just inspiration? Was it fun, entertaining? Or walk away with achlotas tevis, inspired to actually act. And if that doesn't happen, the Rebbe's own words would be considered dvarim betelin, wasted words. Now, I've already been guilty of that many times, but tonight I hope I try not to be. On a Gimmel Tammuz night, to say some things that all of us can go away with, including myself, that can really live up to what the Rebbe wants of us. Because God Almighty, 25 years have passed. You know, what they call insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So, if a day like this is meant to be anything, it's to inspire and shake us up in a positive way, to actually do something different. Not chaz v'shalom, a different Torah or mitzvahs, but different initiatives, something new, something fresh, something exciting, something passionate. So I thought that appropriate would be is perhaps to focus on a few key contributions that the Rebbe made, which in truth, the Rebbe would be the first to remind us that it's not his contributions, it's the Torah. But the Rebbe had us focus on it and understood how to translate it into the language of the contemporary world. Like anything really real and good, that the most original ideas are actually ones that were here from the beginning of time. Like that professor who wrote this magnum opus, and he presented it to the wizards of the world, his great thesis, and they came back with a unanimous Mark, they all said, the paper is both good and original. So he was so relieved to hear such validation. But then they added, we all also felt that the part that was good was not original, and the part that was original was not good. Because the most original ideas are the ones that were always here, but they're embedded, they're trapped. It meant a lot of clutter. So I'll take 5 points. I would even call them transformative principles, all taken from the Rebbe's words, Farbrengens, letters, Yechidus, Setlach, notes that he wrote. And obviously, by no means is this a definitive study, but I think it captures at least part of some of the greatness of the Rebbe, and most importantly of the Rebbe as he lives on till this very day and on. You always like to have acronyms, so I couldn't find a really good one, but the best one I could find was the 5 letters that represent these 5 principles is MIPOD, MIPOD. So they stand for mission, initiative, persistence, opportunities, and destination. First and foremost, we have 7.5 billion people on this planet, and growing as we speak. 14.5 million Ken Yirbu Yidden, Jews. If you had to take a rough guess, how many of these people, if you went over to them right now and said to them, why are you here on this earth, would have an answer, and not just some generic platitude, real answer? How many of you have a mission? Now, you don't have to be a business professional to know that there's no company on earth and there's no organization and no entity that could function, and definitely function efficiently, without what they call a mission statement. And if a company doesn't have that, there's nothing to talk about. There's no way it could succeed. So if a business can't function without one, so here's the question: can a human being function without one? Can we as individuals function and be successful in life without a mission? So what is your personal mission statement? And I've asked this to people, you can imagine, from all walks of life. And the answer most people give: to be happy, to make money, to bring up a good family, a Yiddish family, a Chassidish family, for those that in that world. They're all beautiful values and ideals, but they don't qualify as a mission, because a company that says our mission is to make money, or our mission is to cultivate happy employees, it's not a mission. And first of all, every company is supposed to do that. Second of all, it's nothing unique. A mission, if I can mention maybe one of the most famous ones, is Google. Professor Rabbi Google. What is Google's mission statement? To organize all the information in the world and to make it readily accessible. That's it. A multi-billion-dollar company with over 70, 80,000 employees. Every project, every initiative of theirs falls under that rubric, and they do it well. And over 90% of searches yield results that make you come back. And therefore, they have a business model. So what do you see in this mission? Number one, it's short and sweet. It's unique to them. And above all, you know what it does? It's not about them. They're not saying we want to make a lot of money, which of course they want to do. It's about you and I. What need are you serving? How are you helping the world? How are you helping people? So I would say, maybe above everything else, the Rebbe made it his mission to wake up in us, our mission. And that's what you hear the word. I specifically didn't use the Hebrew word initially because I didn't want anyone to yawn and say, I've heard that 1,000 times. The word is called shlichus. The Rebbe coined that word. A shliach, that every soul on earth is a shliach of God's, sent here. Did not fall here by accident. Everyone has an indispensable mission to accomplish that you and only you can accomplish. A shliach of Hashem, by extension, a shliach of the Rebbe, shluchim, shlichus. The best translation in English is emissaries, people on a mission that know exactly why they're here. The general mission is to make a dira b'tachtenim, to make this world, this mundane, material world, into a divine home. And the specific is to find your particular way of doing so in your corner of the world, wherever Hashgacha Pratis has led you, with your unique skills and faculties, and with your particular opportunities that you have that others don't have. And every yechidus and every encounter, whether by dollars or, as I said, private audiences or by farbrengens, it is always the undercurrent. What are you going to do to fulfill the mission for which you were created? The Rebbe sometimes said it explicitly and sometimes implicitly. You heard in the video here of all the fellows, the people that were interviewed, Rabbi Sachs and there are others. You heard it in Rabbi Wolf's beautiful presentation. And ask anyone. That was exactly the message. And you can never get away from it. You think about it, it is revolutionary in its own right, even without going further, because it creates a tremendous crystallized focus to your life. That's what a mission does. That you may have millions of fragments of activities, but there's a hub, there's a focal point. It's going somewhere. And the Rebbe said it himself in his first Maimer, Basel Legani, the mission of this generation is the Deir Ashvi, by Tulda, by nature. We are the seventh generation, and like Moshe Rabbeinu, the seventh generation from Avram Avinu, we will bring the Shechina Lamata, in Gula Amitis V'Ashlema, V'Shachanti B'Seicham. Clearly stated the mission right at the outset when the Rebbe accepted formally leadership. And he would never waver. You continue through the Nesias of the Rebbe, it was always the point. He didn't mention it actually that often, Deir Ashvi. In the later years, in the 90s, the Nuns, the Mems, late Mems, that language came back. But it was always clear that that is the direction. We're not going here, we're not going there. We have a destination driven by this mission. And every person that Rebbe met and every word he uttered was always, what are you doing in fulfilling that? And it changes your life when you have a mission. As I said, besides focusing, it creates a compelling sense of urgency, which leads me to point number 2, the I, initiative. The Rebbe abhorred, if I can use that word, when people told him, I don't know what I can do. I find myself in a situation. Rabbi Sachs, he didn't mention it on this video, once said that he told the Rebbe, I find myself in a situation that I can't do anything on the campuses. And you know what the Rebbe said to him? I never heard a Jew say he finds himself in a situation. You place yourself in situations. The idea that you don't control your destiny. Obviously Hashem has plans, but whatever you're able to do, you have to take initiative, to be proactive, to make things happen. Not be an observant Jew standing on the sidelines and watching other people do things or waiting for someone to do something. What are you doing in this particular predicament or situation? I was bar mitzvah in the year Tovshin Lamed, 1969, 1970. That Simchas Torah, Tovshin Lamed, still 1969. So, as a proud bar mitzvah boy, growing up in Crown Heights, Simchas Torah, we always had the schus, the merit, we would sit under the tables when the Rebbe would dance hakofis. So around the Rebbe there was tables. At that point it wasn't even tables, it was milk cartons or whatever it was. When you think back, it was quite dangerous, but it always worked out. So we little kids were down there below. The Rebbe would bend down and give us the Sefer Torah to kiss. I remember that. But then on bar mitzvah, they stuck a big hat on my head that went down all the way. And I thought I'm an adult. You know, adults don't sit under tables. So I asked one of my uncles, I said, maybe you have a place? Yeah, stand near me, the bleachers. 770 was then still in transition. It was not the small 770, they were beginning to expand it. And there I was proudly standing The Rebbe dancing akafis, watching from the bleachers, as they say. After the first akafa, my father used to always hang around there, and the Rebbe turns to my father and says, "And where's your son? He used to always dance with us down here below." So my father proudly points, there I am, this little shmendrik in the bleachers, smiling and beaming. And the Rebbe looks to my father and says, "Nu, schon geworden a spectator." Nu, he already also became a spectator. And obviously, they told me that I should get down to the floor. And that year, actually, all the Chassidish Bochrim that heard that, no one ever stood in the bleachers Simchas Torah any longer. They went down on the floor on the ground. So maybe the Rebbe implanted a bug in me that I shouldn't be a spectator. I should be more of a disruptor, more of an active player. So in Crown Heights, there was, every community has its characters. There was a man called Shimshon Stock. He was like Tevye, the milkman of Crown Heights. Closest approximation. And he, before the Nesius of the Rebbe, meaning before 1950, he had an opportunity. I guess the Rebbe was trying to get him inspired to do some learning. That Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, they would learn Gemara together. Every Saturday night, every Motzei Shabbos. One Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe comes. He was not the Rebbe yet, it was called the Ramash, acronym of the Rebbe's name. The Rebbe comes upstairs in 770, and the Rebbe, he's not there, Shimshon Stock's not there. The Rebbe's looking around, he goes outside, there he sees Shimshon's running to the subway station on Kingston Eastern Parkway. And the Rebbe motions to him, so Shimshon comes over. The Rebbe says, "Where are you going? We have a scheduled learning session now." Rabbi, the Rebbe wasn't Rebbe yet. "Rabbi, tonight I have something more important to do. I can't tell you what it is, but it's more important." So the Rebbe says, "That's not fair. I already designated time. We do this every week. At least tell me." So he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll tell you. The Brooklyn Dodgers are playing the New York Yankees, and I'm going to the game. It's a very historic game because those days the Brooklyn Dodgers were based in Lubavitcher World Headquarters in Crown Heights on Bedford and Crown Street, called Ebbets Field. Later, in 1955, they moved to Los Angeles. And when they're playing the Yankees, it was like a real rivalry, Brooklyn, New York, etc. So that's where he's going. And then, I guess he says to the Rebbe, "If you want, I can get an extra ticket." And the Rebbe, of course, respectfully declined. And then the Rebbe said these words to him. I verified the story with him. The Rebbe said, "Let me ask you, how much do these tickets cost?" So what was it back in the 40s? 10 cents, which was a lot of money relatively. The Rebbe says, "So tell me, let me understand this. You're paying 10 cents to watch other people play a game. I'm offering you to be a player in the game for free." So I don't know, Shimshon said, I don't know if I even understood what the Rebbe said, but I declined the offer. And you know something? And he, like with a tear in his eye, he said, "I'm now 70 years old," whatever the age was when he told me, "and I'm still watching other people play the game." In simple English, the Rebbe basically said, we're here to initiate, we're here to change things. We're not here to watch others do things. My father was a journalist, would often say, there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask, what happened? Today there's a fourth category called fake news. They tell you what happened that never happened. That's another story. And the Rebbe wanted us to be people who make things happen. There are hundreds of stories. I'll just share one more because it's such a powerful one. Mrs. Swerdlov, Miriam Swerdlov in Crown Heights. What's that? There's a Swerdlov candidate for president? What is that? Okay, must be family. Good. So she was part of a group of women that went with the Neshei B'nai Chabad for the Midwinter Convention, and that year was the year it was in Detroit, Michigan. Any applause for that? Okay. Anyway, the convention ended on Thursday. Friday, they're supposed to fly back to New York. There's a snowstorm. So there's no flights, the flights are canceled. So what do we call it? Stuck in the snow. And that's what these women wrote to the Rebbe. We're stuck in the snow. And we want a bracha, the snow should stop so we can come back to our husbands and families for Shabbos. And the Rebbe writes an answer. I had it here, I'd read it verbatim, but I'll just tell you close as possible. I'll translate it. In Hebrew, the Rebbe writes, he never heard that a Jew says they're stuck anywhere. You all know the principle of Hashgacha Pratis. And I'm sure you spoke about it at the convention, and you neglected to consider that maybe it also means you. Hashgacha Pratis means that in every situation you find yourself, there's a reason. You have to take an initiative to do something. And how much more is this emphasized here that it's connected to the snow? Snow falls from heaven. So it's a sign from heaven that you need to do something that you didn't finish in this convention. And the Eibishter wants you there to finish something. Either at the airport, or on the way to the airport, or back in the city, to finish the shlichus you began. And when you'll finish, the snow will stop, and you'll know you can come back. The Rebbe's answer. On Sunday, they did stay for Shabbos, and they did whatever they can do. On Sunday, the snow did stop, and the Rebbe basically said, okay, now the shlichus is done. That's an attitude. It changes, if you think about it, a different way of looking at everything. Many of us say, a problem, I don't know what I can do. I'm stuck. It's hopeless. Maybe I can find someone else who can do something about it. I not. But the Rebbe, that was completely unacceptable. And it's because it's driven by a mission. That means the Eibishter gives you all the keiches you need to fulfill your mission. So you have the ability to initiate. Which leads me to the third thing, opportunity. Everything is an opportunity. There's no such thing as just a difficulty. It was Rosh Hashanah Tov Shinun, 1989. And my father had a mini stroke. And he ended up in the hospital. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, I get a call from the Maskiris, from the Rebbe's secretariat, that the Rebbe wants I should come by, I should come to the door. So I went by the Rebbe's door. Those years the Rebbe was not giving out lekach to everyone, but to individuals. Sweet honey cake for a sweet new year. He gives me a piece of cake. He says, this is for your father. For a gesunte Jahr, a sweet, healthy year. Tell your father that when he'll finish the mission for which he was sent to the hospital, Hashem will release him from there. Okay, I run off to the hospital with a cake, with my mission. I tell my father. My mother was there as well, and she starts running around doing mivtzoyim. My father calls her back and says, you're just a guest here. I'm the one that's stuck in this hospital. And my father did whatever he did. Just to show you that it wasn't just a cute, nice thought of the Rebbe's. After Yom Kippur, the next day, Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's chief of staff and head secretary, comes to visit my father. And he says to my father, the Rebbe wants to know if you finished your mission yet. So tell me something. Who goes to hospitals to fulfill missions? We go to hospitals because we have no choice. My father went there because he had a stroke, le'aleinu. But the Rebbe never sees it that way. Beforehand, obviously, we avoid these places. But once you're there, there's always a deeper reason. There's always an opportunity. And when you fulfill that, you're released. And again, this is not an exception. You look around all the Rebbe's attitudes and responses to everyone, always. I have yet to find once that the Rebbe should say, you know, you're right, it's an impossible situation. You're right. Even B'derech HaTeva, the Rebbe never saw it that way. However you explain it, trach gut v'zayin gut, that the Rebbe realized that when you have that attitude, it opens up opportunities, or there's actual opportunity right there under the surface. Regardless, the attitude is very clear. This is a leader. A leader does not react. A leader initiates, and a leader looks for opportunities. And if you want a gashmizdik example, look at anyone that's running a business. Wherever they go, to a conference, to a meeting, on vacation, Whoever they meet, they're looking always for opportunities, a potential client or customer, a potential vendor, a potential networking opportunity, because that's what they're thinking about. The Rebbe, obviously, the opportunity was spiritual opportunities, which is, of course, the essence of Chassidus, that everywhere there are sparks of Gedusha, Nutzutze Gedusha, that are spread all over the world. Each of us is allocated with our amount of sparks. And everything you do, from eating a meal to tying your shoelaces, going on vacation or on business or whatever it is Ma'ashem Mitzadi Gover Kenanu. God leads the footsteps of a person for us to find those sparks, those spiritual opportunities, and turn it into something. I actually skipped the P, so I'm going to go back a moment. I said mission, initiative, went to opportunities. Let me go to persistence. So here I was, a 10-year-old boy in Tovshin Chav Zayin, 1966, Sukkot, those years, the Rebbe would have a fabringen in the Sukkah, which was built right near 770. There's now like a type of courtyard there now. And that Sukkot happened to be torrential rains. The whole Sukkot didn't stop pouring. I remember that because, we Chabad, you eat in a sukkah even if it rains. Now, Chabad sukkahs, as you know, are covered with a lot of heavy layers of evergreens. So that's good in the beginning of a rain. But that's terrible in the middle of a rain, because once they get saturated, these globs of water come from every direction, and you're sitting there down your neck and up here and there and there. So it's quite uncomfortable. So I was a kid. I come to the Fabrengen sometime in the middle of the Fabrengen. The Rebbe is sitting up front. Of course, there's hundreds of people in the sukkah pouring. And said these globs all over. Everyone was there, only one reason, because the Rebbe is there. But the Rebbe is completely oblivious. He's speaking with the whole intensity and focus and concentration. Fabrengen. Now, here's a little kid. I didn't hear the words, but this left an indelible impression on me. And obviously I say it today as an adult. I don't know how I processed it in my mind then, but I'll tell you what was left. This thing called a rain date. If it's raining, you have a reschedule, you schedule it for the next day. Second thing, they weren't eating a meal in the sukkah. It was a fabrengen, a little l'chaim. The Rebbe could have easily had the fabrengen inside 770 and they wouldn't say l'chaim. It's happened. No. Without even a mitzvah to be sitting there. And as I said, there was no meal. This is the Rebbe's custom. He has a fabrengen sukkahs. It makes no difference, rain, snow, makes no difference. What I learned from that was the complete and absolute relentless commitment and persistence in the things you do that are right. That's why actually it was a great shock to all of us. In 1977, Simchas Torah, when the Rebbe had the heart attack, no one could believe that there won't be a fabrengen, Simchas Torah by day. Or actually before HaKofis. Because the Rebbe never was like a loyish besu. You never saw a shift in the schedule. I once told a journalist who said to me, tell me something about the Rebbe that's impressive. So whatever, every time something comes to you, I said, I'll tell you something. Here's a man that I can tell you exactly where he was any given second for the last 40 years. So he says to me, yeah, where was he in the year 1963, June 4th, whatever. I look it up in the calendar, so I see it's the middle of the week. And what time are you asking me? 3:45. I said, he just finished Mincha, he's going back to his room. He says, how do you know? I said, because the Rebbe was completely transparent. We knew exactly where he was. He was like shocked. He gave me another one. I told him also. Then, before Ma'ariv, so on. The journalist tells me, you know what? I don't even know where I was last week. And frankly, I don't even want to know. And most people are that way. Man, 24/7 on duty. I remember he used to bring tears to my eyes. I used to walk after the Rebbetzins Istalkus, and the Rebbe was then in his room. So you could see when the lights were on and off. I'd finish sometimes working late at night, like I'm talking about 4 a.m., and the lights of the Rebbe's room were on. I said to myself, how could a person, human being, 24/7 be in a place, small little room, never goes out, except for the few things, never travels. You have to have that type of persistence, that type of commitment. It's like beyond human. Like, no, all of us have times, a little break, hard work, but we're going to go on vacation. A project that comes a day, okay, a holiday is coming, Shabbos is coming. This persistence is what struck me when I was 10 years old, and it affected my life, actually, when I started giving a class in Manhattan years and years ago. So we all have excuses. One week you're a little under the weather, the next week you're traveling or whatever. I remembered, I said, no, you start something, you never stop. And I learned it from the Rebbe. That type of kviyas, itim l'teira, it's not the amount, it's the consistency that changes things. And the Rebbe did change things because he was persistent, he never gave up. With people who were not necessarily on the highest caliber, the persistence of Farbrengens and the hours and hours of knelling and repeating. I mean, how much patience you have to have and commitment for that. Persistence. And finally, talk about destination. I did the opportunities one already, so our destination. So why am I using the word destination? I'll tell you why. Story. I was giving a class years ago, as I mentioned, and the core group of the people were arts and entertainment industry. Mostly Jews, but they came from very different background than a traditional Jewish one. If you ask them, they would say their spirituality came from Zen Buddhism, or a thing called, if I may, with respect, the rabbis, I hope will forgive me, a thing called LSD, which is not an acronym for Let's Start Davening. Okay? And if you don't know what it is, Tovei Aleichem Bracha. That's what and they would talk to me about their journeys, so to speak. And I would talk to them about my journeys without any substances. So I realized that I was at a disadvantage because here they're sitting, they're looking at me, a guy with a beard and a yarmulke, not projecting a very neutral image. So I may be reminding them, I thought to myself, maybe of an angry grandfather that schlepped them to shul on Yom Kippur against their will, or of an irrelevant Hebrew school teacher teaching them hallow bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah lessons. So I decided to do an experiment. I said, I'm not going to use any words that are loaded, any words that they can interpret or misinterpret, not the way I would want them to interpret it. So instead of all the language, anything associated with Torah and Yiddishkeit, I created my own little language. Instead of God, Hashem, I used the word higher reality, or the essence of it all. Or if it was a particularly new age group, unconscious layers of undefined energy or something like that. Whatever that means. Doesn't matter. They thought they knew what it means. Instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint, which is of course from the Medrash. Instead of mitzvahs, connections, tzavse v'chibur, mitzvahs. Instead of Geula Mashiach, I used the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent and pontificating about this journey to the essence of everything, following a blueprint and making connections to the point of total fusion, seamless fusion between spirit and matter, between form and function, between body and soul, until there'll be a point of an intrinsic unity that will manifest and illuminate in the entire world. That was it. And I kept on all the details, everything that says Chassidus I talked about, but with that language. They were sitting there, they were like, I have to tell you, they were like mesmerized a bit. They were like saying, wow, where do you get all this stuff from? This is great. A few weeks pass, and I'm doing this thing, and I'm waiting to see if they'll ever figure it out. And one guy, he was from a rock group from the 60s called Jay and the Americans, a guy called Kenny Vance. He, before the class begins, he says to me, you know, this has been great stuff. It's your best. He says, are you talking about God? You know? So I said, yes, but shh, don't spoil it for the others, you know? And what did I learn from that? The experiment worked much better than I expected. That words mean things. So sometimes words connect us. And words could also separate us because they're loaded. What does even the word God mean? Now, where did I learn this from? From the Rebbe. I saw a letter from the Rebbe to Rabbi Leibel Bistritsky when he was a bacher, a young man in the 40s. And he writes a letter to the Rebbe apologizing. If the Rebbe can explain to him the difference between Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. Why Atzilus is called Elam HaAchdus, the world of unity. These are four spiritual worlds talked about in Kabbalah and Chassidus. Okay, four spiritual dimensions. And Bria is called the world of the Kisei, the world of the chariot, of the throne. And then he apologizes. He says he's sorry for asking the Rebbe such simplistic questions, but he simply wants to understand. And the Rebbe writes back to him, it's printed in the Igros Kodesh. The Rebbe writes back to him, no need to apologize. On the contrary, I wish all the maskilim and all the big fashteyed, all the big people who understand Chassidus would ask the basic questions instead of relying on these words like crutches. You know, it's easy to speak language that everybody, it's like an inside club. When you have to translate it into a language that is for a person that's not from your paradigm, it forces you to have to actually understand it a bit. And the Rebbe did this very often, in his own way. So that's why, to say Geula Mashiach is no problem. We all know what I'm talking about, or hopefully. But it's also filled with many stereotypes and a lot of controversy, as we know. You say destination, a whole different thing. Destination, wow. What is a destination? What's the beginning of the journey? And that's exactly what it is. What does Chassidus tell us about the Geula? That it's not just an event that will happen at the end of time. The Alter Rebbe says clearly in Perek Lamed Zayin, chapter 37 in Tanya, that it's the end of a process, that every good deed and every mitzvah done from the beginning of time is like a building block. It releases energy. And when it all accumulates, it leads to Mashiach, Geula, because the world has been transformed by these millions and billions of good deeds. And that's why the Geula is Tolei b'maseinu v'avodesenu. Dependent on us, it's not just happening. We are partners and part of the unfolding drama. So, as the fifth point of the Rebbe's fundamental principles, I said transformative ones, of course the last one and the most maybe important one is the destination, which of course is driven by the mission. And what is the destination? As the Rebbe made it clear, that we are at the end of the process. The Staima Vedas HaBirurim, the Birurim of gathering the sparks that I mentioned, have come to a conclusion. I'm not getting now into explaining it all, but it's clearly the words of the Rebbe. I'm not adding one word to it. And that we're the Deira Shvi, the end of the process. And it's our job to open our eyes, to be aware, to reach a higher state of consciousness, if you will, to receive this great revelation, which is not a miracle. It's a result of millions and millions and billions of mitzvahs and mesiras nefesh, of good deeds and sacrifices that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did, which is a yesod in Yiddishkeit. What happened to all that they did? Rahman al-Islam to say that it all died with them. Tanya says, Yichud zeh nitzchi, a yichud of a mitzvah is nitzchi leilam ved. It's eternal. However, we don't see it because we have fleshike material eyes. So if you really think about it, and the Rebbe, who has the vision and the bird's eye view, is telling us a simple thing. All that was done is now coming to fruition. We're reaching the destination. And it infuses every step of the way, because when you know you're reaching a destination, it changes everything. Because if you're just going, okay, you know what? It'll happen when it happens. Where's the destination? I don't know. That's why Bias HaMashiach, Chakale B'chol Yom Sheyaveh, is not just a side thing. It's a Yesed, it's a Iker and Amunah, equated with God Himself. You could argue, you know what? What happens if a person believes in the whole Torah mitzvahs, is Mekayim all Torah mitzvahs, but one little detail, he doesn't believe in Mashiach's coming, Chmon al-Islam. Why is it such an Iker? He could be keeping Shabbos and eating kosher and doing mitzvahs and doing mivtzoyim even. Because the logic is very simple. If God created the world with design, not if, He did create the world with design and purpose and mission. And he gave us a blueprint. The Torah tells us how to fulfill that mission and objective of his design. So to then say that, you know what, we just do the work and not recognize that this mission will be realized, it's like saying someone's driving a train but there's no destination, or we don't know if it'll be reached. It's actually like saying that God doesn't exist, that this whole design and plan is going nowhere, or we don't know where it's going. So it's integral to the whole faith of Torah and Hashem is that this purpose will be realized and it will happen. Now we may be challenged by the faith, like we all have sveikus and challenges, but you cannot deny this is the yesod of all of Yiddishkeit, that every good deed. So when a child asks you, or you ask yourself, what's the difference? Why do I have to be such a good person? The Rebbe once said this in a sikha to the children. Why do I have to be such a good person if everybody dies at the end anyway? It's not the Rebbe's words. But if everybody is not going to be here at some point, what difference if I was a better person, not such a good person? So the usual answers people give is the right thing to do. It makes you feel better. It's what Hashem wants. The answer is actually far simpler and more profound, and that is because even when a person, Rachmana litzlan, dies, the good deeds they do don't. They change the world in some way. Why? Because we believe these mitzvahs are the seeds of Geula, and that's the only way the Jews made it through Golus in Mitzrayim. With all the Yisurim and all the Shibud, was because they had a vision. They were promised, we're going to the promised land. We don't know when yet, but we're going. There's a destination. And that's why we're able to endure anything. And also by the Holocaust. I mean, I was not there, can hardly imagine it. But whenever I speak to a Holocaust survivor and ask the question, did they sing Ani Mamin when they went to the gas chambers? And said Kaddish and Shema and Vidui and different songs and prayers. Doesn't it seem insane? The darkest of moments where you have all the reason to say that Hashem forsake us and is concealed, suddenly you're singing God's praises. And the answer you always get, and I heard this from quite a few people, is this. First of all, we all know Jews are insane, so no chiddush there. But the main thing is that the Jews were declaring, you can take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And if it won't be us, it'll be our children. And if it won't be our children, it'll be our grandchildren. We will reach the destination. And that allows us to be able to endure anything. And a secular psychologist named Viktor Frankl, that confirmed his whole logotherapy, that man's search for meaning, that the people, they didn't suffer less, but people who have meaning and purpose and destination can endure more. They suffer just as much as anyone else, but there's another additional resource in their arsenal. In the words of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this toy, the pistol that was being pointed to his head, this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, and every day another god based on their desires and temptations, but not someone that has one God and two worlds or many worlds. Again and again, the same declaration. We're going somewhere. I was Hanukkah one year in Berlin, and the rabbi tells me, I asked him if he can take me to the Brandenburg Gate. The Brandenburg Gate is the place where Yamach Shemoi stood. We have videos and pictures of it with his hundreds of thousands of legions, spouting what he spouted and doing what he did, dehumanizing in the most grotesque way us, our brothers and sisters, our parents, children, 1.5 million children. So we go there. What's standing in the place where he stood now? A Hanukkah menorah. And the Christmas trees are on the two sides. I asked him, how'd you pull that off? So he says, I'm friends with the curator, and I convinced him for the choreography of the place, it would be nice to have the menorah in the center and the trees on the sides. And you see little Jewish children running around with tzitzis and yarmulkes and girls lighting candles. The Nazis' children are hiding and changing their names. So of course, we're not minimizing the tragedy, but what prevailed? Like the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe said to Lulav when he pointed that gun, he said to him, Lulav said, Rebbe, mir wollen sehen, wer wird eis finden. We'll see who's going to prevail. And the Rebbe said, yeah, mir sehen, wer wemmen. We'll see who will prevail. Lulav was dead, and a few weeks later, the Frierdiker Rebbe was freed to come to America in 1940, middle of the Holocaust, and rebuild Yiddishkeit. And here we are. So the destination is not just a nice theory. It actually changed how Jews behave. It's what beats in our hearts that gives us the ability to endure anything. Baruch Hashem, today, we don't have those tzoros. Today, the war is the war against apathy. I said earlier today by the Fabrengen, apathy. And the Rebbe waged war against comfort zones. Evdim be'eretz Ashur is a lot deeper than Nidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim. The verse says that when you talk about Shefer Gadol, the great Shefer will sound, it will gather the Jews from everywhere, those that were pushed aside in Mitzrayim and those that are lost in Ashur. And the Rebbe explains, pushed aside is due to the oppression, poverty. So you're pushed aside. But when you're in a comfort zone, Ashur from the word prosperity, when things are relatively good, then we have a whole new challenge. It's called being lost. You can get lost in materialism. And though we don't want to turn the clock back, but in some ways it's even a deeper gullus because it's a gullus pnimi. It's internal. It's an attitude. You know, there's always tomorrow. We take for granted our blessings. When was assimilation born? And Rahman al-Islam, intermarriage, not in times of oppression. It was born in times of when the Jews were emancipated. Think of that irony. And the Rebbe waged war against that. And that's what I want to say in my final few words here. It's 25 years from Gimmel Tammuz. But the Rebbe's message and vision, and specifically the mission, taking initiative, the persistence, seeing opportunities everywhere, and all leading toward a destination, lives on. It's eternal. Any one of us that heard these words, any one of us that experienced it, in our small little way, cannot deny. These things do not go away. You never forget them. They may sometimes go a little undercover. You know, we get distracted, busy doing other things. But it's not hard for anyone that was touched to reconnect. So I don't know if there's a better way to honor the Rebbe and Gimmel Tammuz is by embracing each in our own way. What is your mission? We have a great gift. The Eibishter, Hashem, God sent us a messenger. His name is the Rebbe. And he sent him for a reason. The reason is that he should tell us and inform us and inspire us to what our mission is. Because it's so easy to get distracted. And that's what the Rebbe did. So what better way? What is Gimmel Tammuz if not revisiting that in introspection and soul searching? Are we living up to that mission? And are we doing it by taking initiative in every given situation? And the persistence that's necessary, and opportunities, and all infused with that sense of destination. There's no question each of us has a role to play. And as I remember once at a Fabrengen, the Rebbe looked around, not very often that it happened, when he said, everyone here and everywhere has something unique to contribute that not even Moshe Rabbeinu could have done. Because that's why you're here, to do something that only you can do. These are empowering words. They're not just an obligation, a command. So yes, we can cry and we miss the Rebbe, and there's many things to talk about, but the Rebbe always said, turn tears and grief and loss and sadness into action. And the Rebbe was a living example. The Rebbe suffered many losses. Look at what he did with each one. Everything became Mezdus, organizations that live on till this day. Everything. So 25 years is a sad number because you like to believe that something would have really changed. Hopefully, I'm sure it could only go forward, so I'm sure something's changed. But as I said earlier, we don't want to have a situation where we say we're going to do the same things and expect new results. Maybe the time has come, each one of us in our own way, maybe with our children, maybe with some new fresh air and energy, to initiate some new initiatives. The same Torah, the same mitzvahs, but the new ways reach more people. And I want to mention one final thing. I was in Poway, Bashgacha Pratis, California, the Shabbos after Achan Shal Pesach. So if anybody wonders whether this is doable, I saw with my own eyes, as millions, hundreds of millions of people did, a pretty simple shliach no one knew of got up and made the unbelievable Kiddush Hashem and Kiddush Lubavitch that I have not seen in my lifetime. More people saw him say, my dear Rebbe taught us that light is stronger than darkness, and the way we fight evil and hate is with more commitment to love and doing mitzvahs. And I saw how I heard over 1 million people went to shul that Friday night because of his call. I myself in Poway saw thousands of people telling me that they never go to synagogue, but how could they not be here tonight? So yes, it came with a tragedy, but he turned it into a message exactly what the Rebbe would say. So no one can argue that it's not doable. It is doable. We just have to find the focus, and we have to find that commitment. So Hashem should help us all. The Rebbe is with us without doubt. Lo yaziv tzei marisei. A Rebbe never leaves his flock. We may not see the Rebbe, but he sees us. And he sees us sitting in this room. And he sees thousands of other chassidim and non-chassidim, however may be, paying tribute all over the world this weekend. And of course, the first thing we ask for is Rachamei Shamayim, that God should have compassion and the Rebbe should intercede. Compassion that, finally, we're simple people, we're weak people, we're fragile people, and enough is enough, as the Rebbe said in so many Farbrengens, and finally bring the Geula immediately. But, as the Rebbe would say, if the Geula wird sich abhalten, God forbid, will be delayed even a moment, we can't lie or sit around and wait. That's not how we were trained. We have to make a move, take an initiative. And everyone has ways to do so. You just have to apply yourself. And we should be zeich, as the Rebbe said in his last words in the Maimer, Bas Legani, he said, "Wir soll zeich v'niske, zen sich mit den Rebben dolamata masara tfochim," to see reunited with the Rebbe down below here in this world with our eyes of flesh and blood. V'hu yigalenu in the Gula Amitis v'Ashlema. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, for your inspiring words. And thank you for making the long journey to the distant shores of Australia to spend this Shabbos and this weekend with us. Before I conclude the formal part of this evening, I would like to make a few more thank yous, but with the disclaimer that if I was thanking everyone who needs a thanks, would be here for a long time. So the first thank you is for everyone who I don't mention but was involved. So we thank you very much for every single person who helped make this occur. In particular, I would like to mention several people who we might describe as the Ruach HaChaim behind this event. Mati Rabin, Zev Tilson, Avram Adalist, and Yossi Herbst, and to the Young Yeshiva Committee as a whole. Also, I mentioned earlier the partners. I mentioned Leon Soloveitchik, but I also would like to give a very big yasher koach, even though he's not here tonight, to Rabbi Moshe Khan and to Dominion for their tremendous efforts in making this event and many of the other events happening over this weekend possible. Of course, Moshe is in camp now with taking care of our children of the next generation, but we really thank all that he's done in order to make this night and this weekend possible.